Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Devar Torah. This week we have a double Torah portion, the book of Leviticus, chapter 12, verse 1 through chapter 15, verse 33. The two Torah portions that are combined for this week are called Tazriah and Metzorah. These are two of the most challenging of Torah portions because so much of what is in them is difficult for us as modern Jews to relate to. A great deal of the portion is taken up with what has sort of mistakenly, by Torah experts, say mistakenly called as leprosy. It probably wasn't. And what happens to someone who is diagnosed with leprosy, how we treat them, etc., and other rituals of purification. It was thought at that time that once a woman gave birth, that somehow she was unclean and needed to go through some sort of ritual of purification. Well, modern medicine and modern science have taught us a lot about how we treat people who are ill. A lot of what our knowledge is today, we don't think of childbirth as something that renders a woman unclean. So it's very difficult for a lot of people to look at these two Torah portions and to see how they can relate to anything in our world and our modern civilization as progressive Jews. So I kind of found an interesting way of taking a back door into this that I'll share with you, um, just so you can maybe have something different to think about when it comes to these two Torah portions if you're really not thrilled with the idea of reading a great deal about leprosy and diseases and so on. So this is kind of where I found a sort of key here that made sense to me. So there's an old saying that states that cleanliness is next to godliness. Well, as a child, I never completely understood that idea. Does God not love us when we go outside to play and we get dirty? Does God hold people who are manual laborers, whose work often requires them to become quite filthy? Does he hold them somehow in lower esteem than professionals who sit in business suits behind their desks or their computers? Am I somehow more pleasing to God right after I shower than before I take a shower or when I'm a little grungy in the morning? While these questions may sound a bit silly, they were very real to me at one time. It seems that the writers of our Torah were also a bit obsessed with cleanliness. This week's double portion is much concerned with disease, purification, and cleanliness. Modern medicine has taught us that much of what the Torah sees as unclean really is not by our standards today. We no longer look at a woman who has given birth as unclean. Instead, what we do today is we celebrate the miracle of giving life in all of its awesomeness. A person suffering from a disease is not regarded as unclean. Instead, we know that the person needs medical care in order to become healthy again. Judaism does not put much faith in doctors and the medical field, both of which we have contributed to greatly. I'm sorry, Judaism does put much faith in doctors in the medical field, both of which we have contributed to greatly. In the Torah, though, the high priest may declare someone as unclean, but the priests were not involved in any sort of healing rituals. Unlike other tribes that existed at the same time, Judaism has no cult of healing in its past. And while this portion is often looked on as being concerned with leprosy, a disease that was very much feared for many, many years, most Torah scholars no longer believe that the proper translation of the Hebrew word tazarat meant really leprosy. It's not the proper translation. Throughout various translations of the text, the precise meaning of the word has been lost. We know that leprosy, which we know today as Hansen's disease, is completely treatable and it is curable. So, what are we to make of these portions that are quite dated in their outlook on cleanliness and purification? Some scholars have decided to look at these ideas metaphorically or symbolically. They see in these portions a call for a spiritual cleansing or a spiritual healing. They see the ideas as a call to get our relationship with God in order, whatever form that relationship may take for you. Now, with the recent pandemic and all the changes that it has required of us, many of us may have had to rethink our spirituality. If we were fairly regular synagogue goers, we attended services pretty regularly, we no longer had that option available to us. If we were used to sharing Friday evening Shabbat dinners with friends, we no longer had that luxury either. Shabbat became a one household exercise. If we were used to joining others in classes on spirituality or in Torah study, we were now going to be Zooming rather than sitting around a table talking and discussing. Now, none of these changes had to lessen our spiritual health or our spiritual well being. We just had to rethink how to maintain it in these different circumstances and in these different times. That may have been difficult for some, and yet maybe easy for others. Did virtual Shabbat services have the same prayerfulness for you as an in person service? Did Friday night dinner for two become less Shabbat like than when shared with friends? Did we at some point become, quote, zoomed out and tired of connecting via computer screens? Now, as things are beginning to open up slowly but surely, what of those changes will we continue to follow? Or will we abandon all of them? Each of us may have to take a spiritual inventory and make a decision. Now, I have heard that the pandemic and the lockdown made some people feel a closer connection to God and to Judaism. They found the time brought a sort of peacefulness for more personal reflection, for more personal reading, and perhaps some meditation. They used their alone time to find a comfort in their spiritual well being. For others, though, they felt cut off from what made them feel Jewish or what made them feel close to God, because they see God in their friends and they see God in their family. So being unable to socialize was painful to them. They also needed the community of voices lifted in prayer and lifted in song in the sanctuary to have a godly connection. Now, neither of these two attitudes is either right or wrong. Each of us experiences God and holiness in our own way. But perhaps now is an appropriate time for us to take a spiritual health inventory. Each of us can examine how we want to move forward as we begin to face an increasingly more normal world, whatever that means. If we lost our spiritual side, how can we regain it? How can we get it back? If there were changes that we found somehow meaningful, then how do we continue to incorporate those changes into our now increasingly busy lives again? Now, we've just faced a pandemic. COVID threatened our physical health and our physical well being. But we are fortunate to have great medical and scientific minds to help move us beyond it. Medicine and science are excellent, but they are of little help to us in our spiritual health and in our spiritual well being. And while we may not see ourselves as spiritually ill or spiritually unclean, it is probably a good idea for each one of us, for all of us, to take some time to make ourselves healthy in our relationship with God. So, disease doesn't always have to necessarily be something physical or something of the body. It can somehow perhaps infect our inner being, how we are relating to God, maybe how we're relating to our family, how we are relating to our friends. So, taking some time to do a bit of a spiritual inventory, to look at our relationship with God, and through that, our relationship with other people, may be the best thing we can do right now because we are now going through another change. The pandemic is receding slowly. More and more of us are trying to get back to what we thought of as normal life. Perhaps we're going to dinner again. We are finally going to be able to attend Shabbat services in our beautiful sanctuary again. But maybe we still want that quiet time for some meditation, for some reflection, for some reading, whatever the case may be. So now is a good time to look at how we're going to balance the more personal, the more quiet, with those elements that put us back out into the community and see how all of it can work together to make us the best people that we can be. So I wish you all Shabbat Shalom. Have a great weekend, and I will look forward to seeing